down. He's out. Zelensky's been waiting. They have Zelensky on audio tape, apparently, divvying up the goods. America has it. And Zelensky knows. He's been told, we got you. We can kill you anytime we want. If we publish this tape, you won't walk out of Bankova alive. They'll kill you. So you got to play ball. And he's a confused little puppy right now. He's going around to Europe talking to Europeans. Nobody cares. In America, that delegation didn't stop in Europe to touch base. Rubio's not going to the NATO summit. Nobody cares. It's finished. The European experiment is done. It's purely an American-driven operation. It's not about getting us ceasefire. What it does, it's about is shaping the conditions for a post-conflict relationship between the United States and Russia. And that's what is happening with Kirill Dmitriev and Steve Witkov, with Ushakov and Kushner. This is about creating the political environment, that's Kushner and Ushakov, for the economic relationship, Dmitriev and Witkov. And Trump has bought into this. And I guess Trump has decided that the best way to overcome the political opposition is just to cut them all out. Keith Kellogg's been fired. Trump falls asleep when Rubio talked about Ukraine because it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. In Europe, nobody listens to Europe. Nobody cares. They're not invited to anything. And this is where we're at right now. And it's the best option, to be honest, because the only way this war ends is when Russia decides this war is over. That means Russia has to achieve all of its objectives. And it appears that Trump right now is saying, we're not going to put any meaningful obstacles in the way of you achieving this. What we will do is work with the Ukrainians and the Europeans, to the extent that Europe wants to work, on trying to get them to skip the dying part and go straight to the surrender part. But if they don't want to, you won't recognize the battlefield soon. I mean, we're talking about just major collapses ready to occur. Scott, you've been saying this for some time. Yeah, and I've been damn right, dead on the money. The only thing I haven't been right about is the timing, because I'm not in control of the timing. But military math, which I've been talking about for many years now, is exactly what's happening here. The algorithm of, attrition. And Russia has worn the Ukrainians down to the point now where there is no military capacity to sustain this fight in an organized, cohesive fashion. Russia, meanwhile, builds up reserves, army. The Ukrainians say the Russians just have overwhelming numerical superiority everywhere, and they are unable to put up any meaningful resistance at this point in time. Economically, there is no Ukrainian economy. They're begging Europe to steal $160 billion of Russian frozen assets to keep the Ukrainian economy going. There is no money. Ukrainian economy produces nothing. It can only exist on, it's funny, you got the Rada now talking about passing a budget. A budget for what? It's not, normally when you pass a budget, you say, how much tax income but Ukraine's so corrupt, there is no tax income. It goes in the pockets of people. They need $160 billion for this budget, and it doesn't exist. Belgium's finally gotten smart. Maybe the United States got a hold of them, but and said, we're not letting you do this assets because that'll destroy our $1 trillion venture. Belgium sits at the midst of this consortium of resources, assets belonging to nation states that are used to facilitate trade. And the whole idea is that if nations deposit this money, that it's protected. It's there to facilitate trade. And if suddenly you steal Russia's assets, every nation there now will say, well, you steal Russia, you can steal ours. What happens when you don't like what we're doing? You're going to take our money, and that's the end of it. And for Belgium, that would bring about the collapse of their economy and the European economy and the United States as well. We couldn't recover from this. So politely, Europe's been told to pound sand. It just isn't going to happen. So now the Ukrainian economy is going to collapse, or is collapsed. Their energy, Russia's taken them out. They played a game. They tried to attack Russia's energy infrastructure, and they lost. It's a gamble, and they lost. Russia today, yeah, a little bit of belt tightening, but they're okay. Ukraine, not okay. And now it leads to the political collapse, which is being accelerated by this corruption investigation, which apparently is being done at the behest of the United States. We have to be a little careful how we do this, because we ain't clean either. So, but I think what we're looking right now is the organized collapse. And it's very clever. I mean, you have to give Trump and Putin a little bit of credit here, because what's being done is, for instance, none of the existing political structures will survive this war. Even the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament, will be collapsed and restructured in a way that's conducive to Russia's long-term goals and objectives, which are to basically take control of Ukraine politically when this war is done. There will be elections, and Russia's going to win these elections. Zelensky can sit there and have his wet dream fantasies about continuing the war and NATO membership. It doesn't matter. He doesn't matter. He's out. He's a Banderist. He'll be killed or exiled. It's the end of the Banderist faction. They're all going to die. And Russia right now has a whole bunch of people that are waiting in the wings who are going to come in and win the elections. And then, the other thing that came out of the Moscow meeting, interesting concepts, Ukraine, the various issues will be resolved through referendum and voting. Voting is referendum. The Ukrainians may lose Odessa and Mykolaiv through these referendum. Russia will be in control. And this is the reality. Ukraine screwed up. They should have taken Putin's deal made in June. You'd have a sovereign Ukraine then. But Putin put the warning out. If you don't do this, this is the best deal you're going to get, and this is the last time you're going to get it. Well, fool around, find out. And Ukraine right now is finding out the hard lesson. They fooled with the wrong people, and they've lost this war. And it's going to be a decisive Russian victory. And Donald Trump is smart enough to understand that if you want to avoid, a decade-long entanglement that's going to bankrupt everybody and get you nowhere except closer to nuclear war, you have to accept the inevitability of a Russian victory, which he apparently has done. And now he's preparing for a peace that'll position the United States to emerge stronger, both politically and economically.
One of the main objectives of the Russian army and Russian government in Ukraine is demilitarization of Ukraine. How do you see what size of army would Russia accept to agree on in Ukraine?
Russia's already said.
You remember
50 to 60,000. That's it. There won't be any more than that.
The same that it was in Istanbul, in that agreement in Istanbul.
That's it. There will be nothing more. Russia won't accept it. Ukraine had a 260,000 strong military trained by NATO at the beginning of this conflict that was prepared to invade the Donbass and slaughter the Russian speakers of the Donbass. That's 260,000 NATO trained. That army won't be allowed to exist. Now, Ukraine has this fantasy of 600 to 800,000 troops. First of all, they don't have them. But even if they did, Russia won't allow it. To the victor go the spoils. If you want an 800,000-man army, you have to win the war. Ukraine has lost the war. And we're going to see the rapid disintegration of the Ukrainian military very soon. I mean, desertions are at all-time high. And you're going to see units. Now, because to give you an example of what's happening, there's a town, name begins with an M, I can't pronounce it, Minovgrad or something of that nature. There's two brigades. I think it's the 25th Brigade and the 38th Marine Brigade, two of Ukraine's elite fighting forces. They're surrounded. And they've been, there should be about 10,000 guys, but I just told you they don't have any strength anymore. So each of these brigades is down to about 500 men each. That's 1,000 men total. These are the best troops in Ukraine. And they want to be allowed to break out. They believe if they concentrated their strength, they could break out, and most of these guys could walk home alive. Right now, they're starving. They can only be supplied by drones. The drones either come in with the big Baba Yagi or whatever drones come in and drop supplies, or they come in on unmanned vehicles down. But the Russians have direct line of sight control of lines of communications. They're shooting down the drones, blowing up the unmanned vehicles. So these guys are starving. No wounded are being evacuated. They're left to die in the basement. That's one of the things that came out of Pokrovsk, is the Russians went through the basements, and the basements are just full of dead guys because the Ukrainian army didn't allow the wounded to be evacuated. They didn't have any ability to evacuate them. So they died. And that's what's happening to these wounded. If you get wounded in this fight, you're dead. You're not getting out. The other guys are saying, you got to let us break out. And Zelensky apparently just last night said, no, stay there, fight and die. That's it. if you're going to allow your two best brigades to fight and die, as you see on the battlefield right now, all across the battlefield, there's little mini pockets taking place as the Russians outflank and begin to surround these units. These units aren't, they're looking there saying, government doesn't care about us. What are we fighting for? Why are we dying? And you're seeing the whole army is beginning to lose the will to fight, the will to resist. They no longer believe in the cause. And as that happens, they begin to leave their positions in order to save their lives, or just desert, just leave forever. And this is collapse. This is what's happening right now. The Ukrainian army will cease to exist as a functioning fighting force in the very near future. Of any meaningful size. And at the end, what's going to happen is the demilitarization will be as Russia has dictated. Russia will allow a select few, none of your Azov dudes, none of your Kraken dudes, none of these true Banderas believers, but territorial soldiers who weren't corrupted, who didn't get NATO training. I don't think there's going to be any role for anybody with NATO training. 50 to 60,000 people, lightly armed for, securing the border and, basically, limited self-defense. But the idea of Ukraine having a military that can stand toe-to-toe with Russia, nope, ain't going to happen. And there's not going to be Ukrainian military that's going to be the European army. That's what Zelensky wants. 600,000 strong Ukrainian, mercenary force for Europe. Nope, that's not going to happen either. There will be this is demilitarization, and this is what's going to happen.
How do you see the case of corruption? Because after all, I think the corruption would be the key in Ukraine in terms of, and not only corruption, the other point that was mentioned in that 28-point document was the amnesty, given to these war criminals. Don't you think that these two can be used in the aftermath of any settlement in Ukraine in order to remove these ultra-nationalists from power?
Remember, this 28-point plan isn't really a 28-point plan. It's nothing. There's certain points that are indicators on the strategic direction, but the other points are just put in there just to say we covered that base. And I think amnesty is one of those. Again, I think it falls in the line of what happened last June, where Vladimir Putin said we can accept the Istanbul communique updated to represent present reality. Would have been a good deal for Ukraine, but no, they opted out. So now they're going down. To bring about a peace here, there's talk of amnesty. It's sort of a bone. What's my future going to be? Okay, so the war ends. Man, we did some pretty bad stuff. Where they're talking about demilitarization, denazification, corruption. The idea is nope, blanket amnesty. You're all clean. Walk away. That deal is not going to be on the table for long. And when that goes away, the Ukrainians who are corrupt, because remember, the goal of Russia right now is to the political transformation of Ukraine. That means that traditional, power elite structures like the oligarchs and all of the corrupt families, all of the corrupt relationships, they're going to be disintegrated. They're not going to be allowed to stay in place because from that comes the political powers that become the Rada. The Rada is just a tool of corruption. You elect people to a political party, they come in and they divvy up the Ukrainian economy into their pockets. That's what they do. The future of Ukraine cannot be that way. And so Russia will dismantle that, put in their own structures. Whether you want to say those are any less corrupt or whatever, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to be. And I'm not saying that the Russians are incapable of corruption. What I am saying, though, is that whatever exists in the future will be designed to create a political structure that strengthens Russian domination of post-war Ukraine. And in order to do that, you have to disintegrate the current structures. And so, Russia, you can't do that if you give everybody amnesty. So I think, Russia will, and the denazification is another one. People need to understand that horrific crimes have been committed, not by the Russians, but by the Ukrainians, horrific crimes. We don't know the truth of what happened in Kursk. I know a little bit of the truth because I've talked, but these Ukrainian Nazis went into Kursk in these villages along the border. The The young were able to evacuate. The elderly stayed behind, and they were butchered and raped. And I'm not just throwing out words. Butchered, literally hacked to death and raped by Ukrainian Nazis. People who wore Nazi helmets, had the SS thing and all that. And the Russians know who these people are. They're not going to be allowed to live. I mean, I'm not condoning war crimes. I'm just telling you right now, they will not be allowed to live. You're not going to see these people captured. And in the post-conflict, they won't be allowed to reside in Ukraine. They will have to seek, safe haven elsewhere. And I think they need to be careful, because the part of the normalization of Russia, and I'll get to that in a second, will be Russia will say, if you have a war criminal under your jurisdiction, you need to repatriate them to Russia for justice. So I don't think there's going to be too many places where these people can hide. Normalization, a key aspect of all this. People say, well, why isn't Putin going for the kill? I mean, your good friend Gilbert Doctorow, he's a big fan of the decapitation thing. Oh, Gil knows war. No, he doesn't. But that's okay. He stole brandy and whiskey and wine. Good man. But he wants to decapitate Kiev. And why isn't that? It shows Putin's weak. No, it shows Putin's about 400 times smarter than Gilbert Doctorow ever will be. Because at some point in time, when this war ends, you can end the war. Let's say, Gil got a hold of Putin, and Putin said, okay, we're going to decapitate. But kill Zelensky. That's going to make Europe really want to do business with you, make the United States want to do business with you, right? And we're going to go into Odessa because, God damn it, we can. We're Russia. We're going to do everything. Odessa, Kharkov, take it all. And Europe's going to go, see, we warned you about the Russians, aggressive. And there may be a peace. Russia can win the war. But then what happens to the sanctions? They won't be lifted. What happens to the recognition of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Lugansk, and Donetsk? They won't be recognized. They'll become little, like the Baltic states were, at the end of World War II, where we had the map of the Soviet Union, but then we said Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia aren't part of the Soviet Union. We don't recognize that. And so the map would show that Crimea and the 4 Novorossiya oblasts aren't part of Russia. And it creates the possibility for forever war, which is, of course, the last thing Vladimir Putin wants. So because Vladimir Putin is 400,000 times smarter than Gilbert Doctorow, he's not going to go with decapitation. What he's going to go for is the kind of peace deal that he's pressuring to get right now, a peace deal that has the West recognize Russia's legal authority over the 4 territories and Crimea. So there won't be messed up maps, and sanctions will be lifted. And Russia will have the ability not only to recover hundreds of billions of dollars of seized assets, but engage in economic activity with the West unencumbered by sanctions that'll bring in trillions of dollars of economic benefit. The genius of Vladimir Putin. This is what people need to see right now, is that Russia's playing the long game. And the long game doesn't involve feel-good moments of raising the flag over Odessa. They're going to get Odessa, but it's going to be done through a referendum. They're not going to physically occupy Odessa, because that creates conditions where it becomes difficult for Europe and the United States to accept, Russian sovereignty over these territories. Russia behaves responsibly, behaves within the limits that itself has set. And then as Russia gains political control over Ukraine, if there's a need for referendum, there is. But what happens if Ukraine, instead of being a hostile state that Russia has to strip away territories, Ukraine instead becomes the third sister, part of the Union state, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. There's a whole element working. Again, the ignorant people of the world, Gilbert Doctorow, they're unaware of this, you see, because to talk about the Union state means that you actually have to go talk to the Union state, and that makes you somehow a tool of Russia to actually speak with people who know what they're doing and are doing real things. You become a tool of Russia when you do this. No, you become somebody empowered with knowledge and information, and you know that there is right now within Russia and Belarus a major effort to bring Ukraine in as the third sister of the Union state. And that's the strategic goal and objective of many people in Russia, I believe, including Vladimir Putin, although I'm loath to speak on his behalf. But it's a politically sensitive issue. But this is the direction that the Russians are going, with a bigger picture about long-term stability to resolve the root causes of the conflict. If you go in and decapitate and all that, all you do is continue the root causes of the conflict. Russia wants that over. And Donald Trump appears to be willing to facilitate this so that it's truly over. When this war ends, it's over, finished, done.
You know, what's so amazing about Europe, they're talking about that Russia wants to attack us. Then they say we have to go with a preemptive attack, hybrid attack on Russia. This is the first time I see Vladimir Putin coming out and saying something that we haven't heard from him since the war in Ukraine started. We've heard, you know, these sort of reactions from Medvedev, but I have never heard Vladimir Putin responding the way that he's responding to European in this video clip. Scott.
Said that 100 times. We have no plans of fighting against Europe. But if Europe wants to fight and they start this fight, then we are ready right now. There is no doubt about this. But the only question is, if Europe starts the war, unleashes this war, because that's not Ukraine. With Ukraine, we use some surgical means. We are trying to be really careful. Because you understand why. This is not a war in the direct sense of the word. And Europe, all of a sudden, wants to start a war. And if it does start a war, then very rapidly there might be a situation where we have no one to negotiate with.
Have you ever heard Vladimir Putin talking this way?
Yeah, at the beginning. He put the record down. He said, we are going to resolve this Ukrainian situation. And if NATO gets involved, all of our resources will be available. But now we are 4 years later. I think Putin's just fed up with the stupidity of Europe. I mean, how stupid can they be? You've heard this. You know, Putin treated the Europeans with a modicum of respect. He used to take phone calls from, you know, Macron and Merkel and listen to them and consider what they had to say. But now you just look at the stupidity of Europe. I mean, just this nonsense. As Putin said, I think earlier in that, they seek to strategically defeat us. Okay, you want to play that game? Then, yeah. And, you know, what basically Russia's saying is you want a war with us, there will be a war, but understand there will be nothing left when we finish. Nothing. Now, whether or not Russia uses nuclear weapons is another question. You know, but the fact is Russia has considerable strategic conventional strike capabilities. There won't be precision guided. He will totally devastate the industry of Germany, will cease to exist. France, if they want to play stupid games, they'll win stupid prizes. The same thing with Great Britain. There is no defense in all of Europe. You know, they've stripped themselves bare and sent it all to Ukraine, where it's just been destroyed by the Russians. I don't know. Did you hear Rubio the other day? We give them patriots, and then a few days later, they're destroyed. Welcome to the real world. Russia has got it all figured out. There's no air defense left in Germany. So remember that factory outside of Kazan. That's you know, I think that, you know, they were talking about 500 drones a day. I think it's up to 1,000 drones a day. You know, Russia is using, you know, 400, 500 drones a day. Some cases, sometimes down to 200, 300, but they're producing 1,000. Where do you think those drones are? You understand what I just said, that the day Europe wants a war, the skies over Europe will be blackened with Russian drones, and they will blow everything up. Oreshnik will come down and blow everything up. There's a whole new category of Iskander, the Iskander S, which is now an intermediate range missile. It will blow things up with a conventional warhead. Indications are the Russians may have extended the range of the 9M729 cruise missile, which was, you know, originally compliant with the INF treaty, but now that there is no INF treaty, may suddenly have gotten 1,200 kilometer range, which means these cruise missiles will strike targets everywhere in Europe. There will be no square inch of Europe safe from Russia's overwhelming conventional strike, and Europe has no defense. None, zero. There's no defense in Europe to any of this. And that's the reality. And then if France and England want to do something stupid, like you could use a nuclear weapon, then all of Europe disappears instantaneously. Now, that may lead to a trigger a nuclear war between the United States and Russia. It may not, because, the fundamental question that always has to be answered is, will an American president trade Boston for Poznan? The Poznan's a Polish city. I'm just picking it out of nowhere. I'm not saying the Russians have a particular hard-on against that city. But the point is, if Russia decides to nuke a Polish city, is the United States willing to lose a major American city as a result? Or, as the president has been pointing out to Europe, you're doing this to yourselves. You're stupid. You're ignorant. You're dumb. If Europe wants to commit suicide, is the United States automatically required to commit suicide with them? And I think Russia now has a better understanding of where this current administration is, and may even have some insights that, haven't been publicly discussed. But, whereas Joe Biden talked about, the sacred duty of Article 5, it's a sacred bond. It's not a sacred bond. You want to commit suicide, commit suicide. But America's not obligated to join you in your suicide pact. And right now, you have this head of the military committee of NATO talking about a preemptive strike against Russia. First of all, it's a joke. There can be no preemptive strike. I just want to educate people. For us to carry out the opening strike against Iraq in 1991, we had to put together something called the guerrilla package. I mean, it's a big old package of aircraft, hundreds of aircraft that had to be the planning that went into it and everything. NATO doesn't have that. You take America out of it, and we're not going to preemptively strike Russia. You get NATO to suddenly come in. They can't do it. They can't. It physically can't do it. NATO air forces don't have the ability. First of all,